To start, you want to get your students together virtually. You need to do this so that you can establish as a community how you are going to work together. I suggest Zoom. So much of education has always been about community. We are better when we are learning together. We learn from each other and about each other, and we all bring our unique perspectives to the work. Many perspectives increases our ability to think and problem solve together. This does not change because you are online. So gather, set a purpose and a tone together. You and your students are living through a tenuous, anxiety-producing, and uncertain time. Recognize this in all you do. Recognize that not everyone is experiencing this time in the same way. Be kind, be empathetic, be flexible. And don't just be those things towards your students, but towards yourself as well. This is new for them, and it's new for you. This is by no means an exhaustive list of all of the things you might want to consider when leading learning online, but we hope it's a good start for you.
The move to asynchronous education requires us to approach our work with a different clarity and specificity about our goals than we might when we're teaching in person. In our classrooms, we can rely on a dynamic learning experience and nonverbal cues and can respond accordingly. Your first responsibility in online teaching is simple. Figure out what you want your students to know about the content and break that down into a sequence of skill-building activities. But we also need to think about what we want students to understand about how they might ultimately use this information in the field. This could relate to lab skills necessary for an experiment, mathematical formulas or assumptions, social norms and formalities related to using a foreign language in context, or the format of writing on a given topic, for example. We have to create our activities so we're teaching this part too. Finally, because we can't read our students in the same ways we would in a class sitting, we have to be more explicit, and we typically are, about how to do a given assignment. What exactly are we asking our students to do, and what skills do they need to be successful? This could be as simple as providing an example, recording a short video explanation for students, or directing them to an online resource where they can learn more about how to successfully complete the task. Rubrics can also be really helpful here, and we'll talk more about that later. If you're moving an existing class from in-person to online, your job now is to take the learning goals for each session and develop activities that students can complete independently to accomplish the goals around content mastery and content knowledge and the skills they need to successfully engage. Here are some questions you'll want to ask yourself. How long should each module take a student to complete? You'll want to set things up so students can do the module tasks in pieces, knowing that they may need to take breaks. Do you expect students to work independently or in virtual small groups? How can you modify your assignments to replace your existing in-person teaching strategies? Here, you might want to create 3 to 4 different formats through which students learn and then demonstrate their knowledge, so you can provide both variety and consistency of expectations. Also think about the challenges students might face moving from in-person to online sessions. These might be logistical, like internet access and time zones, or practical. If you can't lecture in the ways you're accustomed to, how else can you share the information or help students make sense of course readings, etc.? And how will you engage students who need the repetition of reading something, hearing about it in lecture, and then discussing it? You'll also want to make sure that you have solid plans for monitoring students' progress. Again, think about how you structure the assignments, so you're not assessing students' ability to understand your assignment directions, but you're actually evaluating how their skills and knowledge are developing between modules. It can be helpful to have a proactive plan about how you'll follow up with students about their work. When we talk about meaningful engagement, what we want is for students to have a range of experiences and formats for learning about the content and developing the academic knowledge they need to cultivate and then apply their skills in practice. Present information in various ways. using videos, first-person narratives, readings that represent a range of cultural perspectives, and think specifically about how to make the material relevant for the diverse backgrounds, interests, and life experiences that are represented within your class community. Remember that not every student will need the same input to learn, and offer students a range of ways to demonstrate their knowledge. It's really useful to have explicit rubrics that include the learning goals you've articulated for each module. Tell students what they should know as a result of the module, and how you want them to show their learning. Often, your student work plans and rubrics can look very similar. You're telling your students the expectations for engagement, understanding, and demonstration. Let them know what it would look like to successfully complete the assignment, to partially complete it, or to not meet the expectations. If they know this going into the activity, and they know how they will be evaluated, the work becomes easier for both of you. You should create these in ways that make the learning and assessment transparent for you and for them. If you put time into this on the front end, the grading burden will also be more manageable for you. With asynchronous classwork, your students need to hear from you consistently and in a timely manner about the work they've completed, so they can build successfully to the next module without getting too far afield due to a misunderstanding, but also so that they have the experience of knowing that there's an actual person who's invested in their learning on the other side of the send button. You'll also want to think about if or how you'll create an online learning community for your students. More on this later.
In your online work, consider universal design for learning. UDL is a powerful framework for educators that centers around 3 principles. 1, multiple means of representation. In other words, give learners various ways of acquiring information and knowledge. 2, multiple means of expression. In other words, provide learners alternatives for demonstrating what they know and are able to do. Multiple means of engagement. In other words, tap into learners' interests, offer appropriate challenges, and you increase motivation. The ideas of UDL are designed with neuroscience research on the networks of the brain that affect learning. Implementing UDL requires anticipating a range of learning needs and embedding scaffolding into the curriculum and course materials that support students through challenges to content mastery and the acquisition of the skills you want them to gain or refine. As you think about creating online courses, keep all of these things in mind.
Even in an online context, it's important to think about trauma-informed teaching. Keep in mind that everyone may be adjusting to this new approach. The more communicative, consistent, and predictable you can be with your students, the better. This is why it can be helpful to record videos of yourself explaining expectations. Share with students what they can expect from you, what happens if you or if they fall behind, and offer a reliable format through which information is presented in each module. Sometimes just seeing that you're there can be reassuring to your class. Keep in mind that your students may also be experiencing their own challenges, and prepare to adjust your expectations accordingly. For example, consider having students create an outline of their learning and knowledge rather than writing a full paper. Have them create resources they can use as references later or share with classmates. Developing modules with built-in flexibility is one way you can demonstrate to students that you understand they're navigating various life demands in addition to engaging with your class.
Creating community is absolutely essential to a good educational experience. In Peter Block's brilliant book, Community, he says, "The key to creating or transforming community, then, is to see the power in the small but important elements of being with others." So think about the ways that you do or would like to create community in in-person classroom contexts. What are the elements that make a successful learning community? How can you translate those elements into an online experience? Make sure to center the building of community in your online classroom spaces. Our shared humanity relies on interconnectedness. Do not lose sight of this just because you are not all in the same room. Refocus on the idea that your small group, your digital classroom community can help create a needed shift. For as Peter Block says, every time we gather has the potential to become a model of the future we want to create. Think about the future you want to create and build that into your online communities. Using a rubric is something you're really going to want to think about in your online classroom spaces. There are a multitude of ways that rubrics can help you in your classroom community. For more on rubrics, click on the links in the notes section of the Google slideshow. There are 5 ways that the University of Florida Center for Technology and Training suggests that rubrics can be helpful in an online classroom environment. Number 1, your rubric can help to share expectations. What are you assessing and what is expected? If you can communicate your expectations clearly to students in a rubric, their work becomes elevated and easier for them to accomplish. Number 2, they can be an assessment tool, which makes your work easier to accomplish. You can use a well-designed rubric to streamline your assessment of student work. If the content and skills you are assessing are clearly defined, it becomes clearer and easier for you to assess the work and give relevant feedback. 3, you can use your rubrics to make sure that the tasks you are asking are aligned with your objectives. So you make sure you're asking your students to do something that aligns with what you say your overall learning goals are. If your rubric shows that the task you are asking does not align with your overall learning objectives, you can use this as a time to go back and revise and edit your work. Number 4, rubrics can serve as powerful peer feedback vehicles. Students can use the rubrics to give each other feedback while in process, using the same assessment tools and techniques that you, the instructor, will use to grade the work or assess the work in the end. So a student can share their work with another student who then gets to learn the rubric even more on their own to help their fellow classmate to figure out if their work is meeting the criteria. Which leads us to the 5th way that rubrics are helpful, for self-reflection. The rubric becomes an invaluable tool for students to reflect on their work while it is in process, as well as a checklist to make sure they've done everything they needed to before submitting their work. And if they use the rubric during the peer feedback process, they will learn the rubric that much more, which will help them to reflect on their own work and if it has met the criteria set by the rubric.